So we're tackling a list compiled by CanceledSci-Fi.com, their picks for 25 of the greatest sci-fi and fantasy shows ever.
A bold claim, but a fun one to unpack.
Absolutely. And they're actually still adding to it, so it's more of a celebration of the genre than a definitive ranking.
Which is good because ranking these shows would be, well, impossible, so they've opted for alphabetical order instead.
Smart move.
Woo!
Okay, so first up, Babylon 5. Now, this show gets a lot of credit for pioneering those long, complex story arcs that are so common in sci-fi now.
Right, you have to remember, back in the early 90s, most sci-fi was episodic. You could turn in any week and pretty much follow along. But Babylon 5 had this whole 5-year plan. Storylines spanned seasons, culminating in this huge war involving all these different alien civilizations.
Yeah, it was a huge departure from the Monster of the Week format that a lot of shows were doing back then.
Totally. And it paved the way for shows like The Expanse, Battlestar Galactica, shows that really embraced serialized storytelling.
Speaking of Battlestar Galactica, it's interesting to compare it to Babylon 5. They both deal with these huge conflicts, but Battlestar had this gritty, almost morally ambiguous tone that felt so different from a lot of the more optimistic sci-fi that came before it.
It took the basic premise of the original 78 series, but completely reimagined it. Post 9/11, I think that fight for survival just felt so much more real, more desperate.
Definitely. And they didn't shy away from the tough questions, faith, politics, the cost of war. I mean, people are still debating that finale.
Oh, for sure. A lot of strong feelings about that one.
Okay, let's jump back a bit further. Blake 7. I'll admit this one's a bit before my time.
You're missing out. It's a British show from the late 70s, really a prime example of how sci-fi can be used to explore political and social themes.
So what's the setup?
Basically, you've got this group of rebels, kind of ragtag bunch, fighting against this totalitarian government in space. There's this gritty realism to it that was pretty groundbreaking at the time.
Interesting. Okay, from gritty realism to, well, supernatural high school drama, right?
Yeah.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's a show that kind of walks the line between sci-fi and fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. On the surface, you've got a teenage girl slaying vampires and demons, but underneath, it's a coming-of-age story dealing with identity, responsibility, all those challenges of growing up,
Yeah.
but with a supernatural twist.
And a lot of humor, too. I think that's why it resonated with so many people. It took these universal experiences, high school friendships, and added this whole other layer of fantasy.
Totally. It made it relatable, but also fantastical.
Yeah.
Okay, we can't talk sci-fi and fantasy without mentioning Doctor Who, right?
A show that's been around for, what, over 60 years?
And still going strong. The list we're looking at focuses on the classic series, 1963 to 89. So for those who maybe aren't familiar, what makes this show such an icon?
Well, I mean, you've got a Time Lord traveling through time and space in his TARDIS, a blue police box. But the real genius is the regeneration aspect.
When the Doctor is fatally injured, he can regenerate into a new body, which means they can keep the storyline going, different actors playing the same character. Brilliant.
Yeah, keeps it fresh. And, even with those old school special effects, the storytelling in those early episodes, it can be so imaginative.
Absolutely. Okay, from time travel, let's jump to space exploration, The Expanse, a show that a lot of people praise for its hard sci-fi approach.
Yeah, they really tried to get the science right. It's not just about spaceships and lasers. It's about the physics of space travel, the political tension between Earth, Mars, the outer planets, even the challenges of colonizing other worlds.
Right. They consulted with scientists and engineers to make it all as accurate as possible. You can tell, especially in how they portray things like gravity and what prolonged space travel would actually do to the human body.
It makes it all feel more real, more immersive.
And from the realism of The Expanse to, well, the complete wildness of Farscape, this show was a crazy blend of puppetry and live-action space opera.
Farscape, that was something else. Astronaut gets flung across the galaxy, ends up on this living spaceship with all these escaped prisoners, weird alien creatures.
And some of those creatures were puppets. From Jim Henson's Creature Shop, no less, gave it such a unique look.
Oh, yeah. It's not your typical space opera, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Crazy storylines, quirky humor, but also those characters, they really grew on you.
They took risks, that's for sure. Pushed the boundaries of what a sci-fi show could be.
Sadly, Farscape is one of those shows that got canceled way too soon. Kind of like, well, Firefly, which is next on the list.
Ah, Firefly. The show that launched 1,000 fan campaigns. A space western with a heart of gold. Joss Whedon, the creator, he also did Buffy,
One season and done. But man, those fans are still passionate.
It's a testament to the power of good characters, good dialogue. That blend of genres really resonated with people.
It's a shame it didn't get more time to shine. Okay, another show with a dedicated fan base, Fringe. And it really evolved over time, right? Started almost like an X-Files type procedural, but then
It took a hard left turn into the world of alternate realities and parallel universes.
I remember watching those early episodes thinking, okay, cool. FBI team investigating weird stuff. But then the whole mythology starts to unfold, and it just gets deeper and deeper.
Right, you've got the shadowy corporation, this whole other universe, these scientists pushing the limits of what's ethical, what's even possible. And the characters, too, they start out as these archetypes, but they become so much more complex as the show goes on.
Yeah, they go through a lot together. Okay, let's lighten things up a bit. Futurama. Who would have thought a cartoon could be so smart, so funny, and so sci-fi?
Right. It's brilliant satire set 1,000 years in the future. Pizza delivery guy accidentally gets cryogenically frozen, wakes up in the year 3000.
I mean, the premise alone is gold. And they managed to poke fun at everything.
Yeah.
Consumerism, celebrity culture, politics, even the environment.
But it's not just jokes, though, is it? There's a real heart to it. The characters, their relationships, there's a real warmth there.
You laugh one minute, you're tearing up the next. It's a special show. Okay, from animation to, well, let's just say a show that took the world by storm, Game of Thrones.
Epic doesn't even begin to describe it. It pushed the boundaries of what fantasy television could be. Huge cast of characters, intricate storylines, and they weren't afraid to go to some pretty dark places.
People were obsessed. The battles, the dragons, the political intrigue. And I think that sense of danger, knowing that no character was safe, it just hooked people in.
You never knew what was going to happen next. And of course, we can't talk about Game of Thrones without mentioning that final season.
Let's just say it sparked some heated debates.
To put it mildly, some people loved it, some people hated it. But I think it shows how invested we become in these stories, these characters. When a show ends, it's like saying goodbye to part of your life.
It's so true. Okay, time for a bit of cosmic comedy, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you want sci-fi that's both absurd and brilliant, this is it.
Douglas Adams, the author of the books, he was a genius. Arthur Dent, ordinary guy, suddenly finds himself hitchhiking across the galaxy because Earth got demolished to make way for a hyperspace bypass.
It's just so out there. So many quirky characters, bizarre situations. It's sci-fi, but it's also a satire of, well, everything. Life, the universe, everything. And it reminds us that sci-fi doesn't always have to be serious. It can be fun, it can be silly, and it can still make you think.
Yeah?
Speaking of shows that make you think, let's talk Lost.
Oh, man, Lost. That show was a phenomenon. When it premiered, everyone was trying to figure it out. The mysteries of the island, those flashbacks, what did it all mean?
They really knew how to build suspense, keep people guessing, all those fan theories online, people trying to piece together the clues.
Yeah, it really got people talking. And even though the ending, well, not everyone loved it, Lost was a landmark show, it proved that sci-fi could be both entertaining and intellectually stimulating, and it definitely left its mark on the genre. Okay, from a mysterious island to a very different kind of mystery. The Man in the High Castle.
Alternate history, right.
Yeah.
What if the Axis powers had won World War II? It's chilling, but also fascinating to think about.
What would that world look like? How would people live? It forces us to confront some pretty uncomfortable truths about power and oppression, and it feels especially relevant now with everything going on in the world. It reminds us that freedom and democracy are fragile things that can be lost if we're not careful.
Yeah, it's a powerful message. Okay, let's go back to anthology series for a minute. The Outer Limits. People often compare it to the Twilight Zone, and I can see why.
Yeah, they both explore that dark side of human nature, the unintended consequences of technology, things like that. The Outer Limits lend a bit more into sci-fi, though, I'd say. While Twilight Zone often had more of a fantasy or supernatural bent.
And some of those Outer Limits creatures, seriously creepy.
Oh yeah, nightmare fuel for sure. And you can't forget that opening narration, right? There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture.
Still gives me chills. Speaking of chills, The Prisoner. Now, this is a show that gets under your skin.
British series from the 60s, super surreal. It's about this former secret agent who gets kidnapped, taken to this mysterious village where everyone is known by a number, no names.
And he's trying to figure out who's running the place, why he's there. It's a total mind trip.
It's all about identity, free will, the dangers of surveillance, conformity. Really ahead of its time in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that one will stay with you. Get ready for a laugh. Red Dwarf, British sci-fi sitcom. Total cult classic.
Set millions of years in the future on a mining spaceship. And the last surviving human is stuck with this crew of holograms, androids, and a creature that evolved from his pet cat.
Sounds about right.
It manages to be both silly and smart. Slapstick humor, but they also touch on some surprisingly deep sci-fi concepts.
And those characters, so quirky, so dysfunctional. But you can't help but love them. Okay, let's go way back to the very early days of sci-fi on TV. Space Patrol.
This one premiered in 1950. Yeah, it looks pretty dated now, but you have to remember, it was groundbreaking for its time.
One of the first sci-fi series to ever air on television. Ray guns, robots, interplanetary travel. It paved the way for everything that came after.
Even with the cheesy special effects, it's still fun to watch. Shows how a good story can transcend its limitations.
Okay, back to Star Trek. Deep Space Nine. A lot of people consider this one of the most complex, most nuanced Star Trek shows.
It broke the mold in a lot of ways. Setting it on a space station instead of a starship allowed them to tell more serialized stories. And they weren't afraid to explore some darker themes.
Yeah, war, religion, political intrigue. Things that the previous Star Trek shows hadn't really delved into as deeply.
And the characters were fantastic. So much depth and complexity. Deep Space Nine has aged really well, I think.
It still feels relevant today, especially with so much division and unrest in the world. Okay, from Deep Space Nine to, well, the show that brought Star Trek back to life, The Next Generation.
New crew, new starship, but it stayed true to the spirit of the original series. That sense of optimism, that belief in a better future.
Exploration, diplomacy, scientific discovery, understanding different cultures, all those classic Star Trek themes.
And they didn't shy away from social issues either. Racism, sexism, the environment. The Next Generation proved that Star Trek could still be relevant, could still make you think.
And of course, we can't forget the show that started it all. Star Trek. The original series.
It was groundbreaking, revolutionary even.
Captain Kirk, Spock, Bones. Such iconic characters. And they boldly went where no one had gone before.
It tackled social issues, promoted diversity, inspired people to dream of a better future.
Yeah, even though the special effects might look a bit cheesy now, the impact of that show is undeniable.
And the themes, they're timeless. Okay, speaking of shows that left their mark, how about Stargate SG-1? Took this idea of a Stargate, a portal to other worlds, and ran with it.
10 seasons. Action, humor, intrigue, they built this whole fascinating mythology around it.
A team of explorers and soldiers traveling through the Stargate to different planets. New civilizations, alien threats, ancient mysteries.
Richard Dean Anderson is Jack O'Neill. Such a great character.
Stargate SG-1, it was just fun, but also thought-provoking at times.
A real crowd pleaser. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, but we can't wrap up without talking about a true classic, The Twilight Zone. As relevant today as it was back in the 50s.
Rod Serling, the creator, he was a master storyteller. Each episode, a self-contained story. Sci-fi, fantasy, horror, always with a twist.
And he wasn't afraid to tackle tough issues. Racism, war, conformity, the dangers of technology.
The Twilight Zone, it was ahead of its time. Its influence is still felt today. Okay, last but not least, The Walking Dead. A show that took the zombie genre and turned it into something epic.
Survival, humanity, those tough choices we make when faced with unimaginable horror.
It wasn't just about the zombies, though, right? It was about the characters, their relationships, how they dealt with loss, grief, betrayal, the constant threat of death hanging over them.
And those moral compromises.
Yeah.
What does it even mean to be human when the world has gone to hell?
The Walking Dead could be brutal, heartbreaking, but also, at times, surprisingly hopeful. It's a show that stays with you.
Man, that's quite the list, huh? From the early days of Space Patrol to something as intense as The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Sci-fi and fantasy, it really covers a lot of ground.
It does, and what's striking to me is how these shows, even the ones that are decades old, they still manage to tap into these universal themes. You know, it's not just about aliens or spaceships, it's about us.
Oh, absolutely. The Twilight Zone is a perfect example. You've got those fantastical elements, sure, but at its heart, it's about human nature. The choices we make, the consequences, that's why it still resonates today. And The Man in the High Castle, that alternate history where the Axis powers won, it's chilling. But it also makes you think, right, like how easily things could have gone a different way.
And what that world would actually look like. It's a real reminder that freedom, it's not a given. It's something we have to constantly protect. And then you have The Prisoner, with its themes of surveillance and conformity, feels almost more relevant now than ever.
Totally. In this age of technology, where privacy is becoming more and more elusive. The prisoner is downright prophetic.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that's really changed over the years is the storytelling, right? Moving away from purely episodic narratives.
Oh, yeah. Think about those early Star Trek episodes. Most of them were self-contained adventures. But then you get a show like Babylon 5 with those multi-season arcs. It allows for so much more depth, more character development.
It's like the difference between reading a short story and getting lost in a novel, like Deep Space Nine. Being able to tell those stories over multiple episodes, multiple seasons, let them explore the complexities of war, politics, all that stuff in a way that just wouldn't have been possible otherwise.
Right. And then you have Game of Thrones, which took it to a whole other level. Multiple storylines, all weaving together, keeping you on the edge of your seat. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with how it all wrapped up, but...
Yeah, let's just say opinions vary.
Another thing I've noticed is the rise of more female-led sci-fi and fantasy, which is great to see. Buffy, I think, was a real trailblazer in that regard.
A young woman is this powerful, complex hero. And she wasn't just battling vampires. She was dealing with all the normal high school stuff, too. Friendships, relationships, it was so relatable.
Exactly. It normalized the idea that women can be these kick-ass heroes while also, just living their lives. And Battlestar Galactica, you had Commander Adama, Starbuck, strong, flawed women making tough decisions in a world that's falling apart.
It's so refreshing to see these well-rounded female characters taking center stage.
Yes.
It just opens up so many possibilities for storytelling, different perspectives. But with so many amazing shows out there, where do you even start? It can be overwhelming for someone who's new to all this.
Don't overthink it. Start with what you know, what you like.
And don't be afraid to watch some of the older shows, even if the special effects might look a little cheesy by today's standards. Doctor Who, for example, some of those early episodes, yeah, the effects are rough, but the stories, they're still so imaginative, so engaging.
It's about the heart of the show, right? The characters, the themes, those things are timeless. Don't get hung up on the window dressing.
And remember, it's a journey. You won't love everything you watch, but that's part of the fun. Discovering those hidden gems. And don't be afraid to talk about it, with friends, family, online communities, sharing your thoughts, your theories. It's part of the experience.
For sure. Bouncing ideas off other fans, it just adds a whole other dimension. You might even find yourself inspired to create your own sci-fi or fantasy world. Who knows?
Now, there's a thought. We've seen how these shows can inspire us to think differently, to imagine new possibilities.
To explore what it means to be human in all its complexity.
Well said. Well, as we wrap up our deep dive into these 25 incredible shows, I'm left with this sense of, wonder, excitement for the future of the genre.
It's exciting to think about what stories are still out there waiting to be told. And the thing is, this list, it's just a tiny fraction of what's out there, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole universe of sci-fi and fantasy to explore. Books, movies, video games, comics.
It's a never-ending source of entertainment, inspiration, and thought-provoking ideas.
Yeah.
But before we go, let me put you on the spot for a second. Of all the shows we've discussed today, which one would you say has been the most groundbreaking, most influential?
Oh, wow. That's a tough one. They all have something special, but I think if I had to pick one, I'd go with Star Trek, the original series. It was just so ahead of its time, the diverse cast, the optimistic vision of the future. It showed that sci-fi can be more than just escapism. It can be a way to comment on society, to explore what it means to be human.
Yeah, even though the special effects might look a little dated now, those core themes, exploration, understanding, cooperation, they're timeless.
It's a show that still inspires us to be better, to strive for something more, and I think that's the real power of sci-fi and fantasy. It can entertain us, it can make us think, and it can even challenge us to change the world.
Well said. And on that note, it's time for our final thought-provoking question. All right, so imagine this. You've got the keys to the TARDIS. Where are you going? What point in time, what corner of the universe is calling your name?
Ooh, that's a good one. It really makes you realize the possibilities are endless, right? I think I'd be drawn to the Library of Alexandria back when it was at its peak. Imagine all that knowledge, all those lost texts from antiquity, just waiting to be rediscovered.
That's a fantastic choice, to be surrounded by all those scholars, all those brilliant minds. To witness that kind of intellectual energy firsthand, it'd be amazing.
Right. A real hub of learning and culture.
I think for me it'd be a toss-up. Either some ancient civilization, like you said, or maybe, a journey to a planet we haven't even discovered yet. To see alien life in its natural habitat.
Now that would be something else. To encounter a civilization that evolved completely independently from us. Who knows what we could learn from them?
It's both exciting and kind of terrifying to think about, right?
Yeah, definitely. But that's what I love about sci-fi and fantasy. It lets us explore those what-ifs, those big questions about our place in the universe.
It's a safe space to dream, to imagine, to confront our fears. And as we've seen today, there are so many incredible stories out there just waiting to be told.
This list of 25 shows, it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more out there to explore.
Exactly. Books, movies, video games, comics. The possibilities are endless. And who knows what amazing stories are still to come.
I can't wait to see what the future holds for sci-fi and fantasy.
Me too. Well, I hope our little deep dive today has inspired you to check out some of these shows or maybe explore some other corners of this amazing genre.
And if you've got thoughts on where you'd take the TARDIS or any other sci-fi and fantasy shows you think people should watch, let us know. Leave a comment below.
We'd love to hear from you. So until next time, keep exploring, keep dreaming, and may your journey through the realms of sci-fi and fantasy be filled with wonder and discovery.